Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in this world of ours. I hope you're truly safe, sound, and above all, healthy. I'm Aaron David Miller, a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and welcome to Carnegie Next, a series of conversations on issues of critical importance to America and to the world. Today, we're going to be talking about North Korea. And I must say, if there's a poster child for a rogue state, I suspect it would be Pyongyang. It now is a nuclear weapons state. It's supported terror abroad. It's constructed and exported nuclear technology and ballistic missile technology. It's allegedly participated in counterfeiting and drug operations, and has posed an enormous headache for American policymakers, Republican or Democrat. In fact, decades of engagement with the North Koreans by Republicans and Democrats have really failed to end its objectionable behavior. And certainly on the issue of denuclearization, it's a policy that would be best described in one word, which is failure. So I guess my question at the outset is this the definition of insanity? Are we essentially plying the same failed course and expecting different results? So in essence, what's up with North Korea? What does Kim Jong Un really want? Is peace on the Korean Peninsula possible? What do we do about the reality that you have a nuclear weapons state, not a threshold state? What are the lessons of decades of engagement with North Korea? And perhaps intriguingly, would a fourth summit between Kim Jong Un, I'll refer to him from now on as KJU, and Donald Trump matter? The question of why we should care about North Korea may have been answered by filmmaker Catherine Bigelow, who has come out with a new movie, House of Dynamite, which purports to show an ICBM launch at the continental United States, at CONUS. It never says in the movie North Korea. I think that is probably the assumption, which would leave the residents of Chicago, which I think is a city targeted, with about 30 minutes or so to get their affairs in order. So to help us unpack all of this, we have two probably the best North Korea watchers on the planet. Joel Witt is the Distinguished Fellow in Asian Security Studies at Stimson Center. He's an internationally recognized expert on Northeast Asian security issues. He worked at the State Department and helped negotiate the 1994 DPRK agreed framework, and was subsequently in charge of its implementation until he left government in 2002. Most important, at least for today and the days and weeks to come, he's author of a fabulous new book, which reads like a spy thriller, I must say, Fallout, the inside story of America's failure to disarm North Korea. Jean Lee, who I'm happy to say is a former colleague of the Wilson Center, there's a sad story, given the administration's decision to try and hollow it out and dismantle it. Jean is now the East-West Center's inaugural presidential chair. She's a policy analyst and veteran foreign correspondent who reported across Asia, the Pacific, Africa, Europe, and North America before transitioning to research and policy analysis. She ran AP's North Korea Bureau from 2012 to 2015. And as I mentioned, we worked together at the Wilson Center for a time. Welcome to you both. I want to start, since it's rare to get two humans on the planet that actually have been to North Korea and engaged with North Koreans. I know it's been some time for both of you, at least in terms of visiting, but what are your sort of overall takeaways that seem to have held up from your time there? Jean, let me start with you.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and it's great to see you as always. I miss our conversations and discussions that we had at the Wilson Center. But yeah, in the context of this discussion, what I will say about what it's like to be in North Korea and engage with North Koreans is one of the things when you're in Pyongyang, besides the fact that it always feels like you're going back in time, one of the things that always struck me was how present the Korean War narrative was everywhere in North Korea. We call it the Forgotten War, right? That conflict from the 1950s. But when you get to North Korea, you see it embedded in the everyday life. You see it in their artwork. You see it. I've written quite a bit about how you see it in the kindergartens. You see it in the artwork. You hear it in their music. It's so much a part of their lives. And so that's one thing that I mentioned, because we cannot see or feel that when we're outside the country. It's so present in everyday life in North Korea. And I mentioned that because what it says to me is that even though what we're seeing are the resurgence of these traditional friendships with China and Russia, when you're there in North Korea, it's always about the United States. And so as we have this discussion about the failure of diplomacy, I want to mention this because for the leader of North Korea, resolving the tension with the United States is always the big and most important challenge. And so what that gives us is not only the opportunity, but also the obligation to try to resolve this conflict. And I think, as you mentioned, with something like the House of Dynamite, which I haven't seen, but the implications of not trying to resolve that challenge are massive. And just on a personal level, I think thank you for asking that question. We have to remember that even though we see this as a policy issue, there are real human lives at stake, not only in North Korea, I would say in South Korea as well, in the broader region, and as you mentioned, here in the United States, globally.
Yeah, I often quote Faulkner here, if in Requiem for a Nun, when he said the past is never over, it's never even past. I think that's right. I mean, history may be over for us, but it's not over for our allies and adversaries around the world with which we deal. President Xi invokes, Mao Zedong's steadfastness repeatedly in the wake of the current trade war with the Trump administration. Joel, you actually negotiated with North Koreans, and I know you were taken captive, held prisoner, detained for a while. What is your experience?
Yeah, well, thanks, Aaron. I'm happy to be here. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that particular episode. And to start off, what I'd like to say is everyone thinks about North Koreans as robots with this coding of ideology. But I've always avoided discussing that. And what I found in dealing with North Koreans is a real sense of national interest, problem solving, and pragmatism. And so let me tell you about that episode that you mentioned. I was leading an American inspection team of a suspected nuclear site in North Korea. And one of our inspectors did something wrong. So we were locked in a conference room, surrounded by soldiers with bayonets drawn. And I spent several hours arguing with the base commander. And a lot of the members of our team thought we were going to be shot. But it turned out that the problem was solved when the North Korean foreign ministry people came to me and we sort of colluded to convince the military to let us go. Mm. And so I was very surprised by that episode. And the reason they did that is because Bill Perry was supposed to visit North Korea after we had left. But I found that element of pragmatism and, problem solving continued throughout my discussions with North Koreans over the next 30 years.
I mean, it's counterintuitive given the image that the North Koreans present. Somebody snapped a picture or made a Xerox. They weren't supposed to. What was the alleged offense?
Oh, it was really ridiculous. And I can say this now. Our team was composed of a lot of desk-bound intelligence analysts who jumped at the chance to go to North Korea. And so one of them was sketching the above ground barracks, which was ridiculous because they were essentially wooden sheds that our satellites didn't even bother looking at.
Right.
But we weren't allowed to do that. And he was caught. So, the North Koreans wanted to see all of our inspection books. But the foreign ministry people basically lied to the military and said, oh, we looked at the books and they're all okay.
Right. Before we get into the question of U.S. policy, rethinking or not U.S. policy toward North Korea, I want to establish some ground truth by drilling down on the internal situation in North Korea and North Korea's relations with at least two or maybe three key partners if we have time: South Korea, China, and Russia. To you first, Jean, are we reading Kim KJU correctly?
It's very hard, right? You mentioned that we haven't been there in a long time. I spent 9 years traveling to North Korea, spent a good part of 3 years on the ground, but we have not had any American journalists in North Korea since 2019, as far as I know, unless someone snuck in, and that's quite a long time. And what that, I do believe that Kim Jong Un took advantage of the pandemic to seal the borders, to retake control of the narrative. And what he succeeds in doing then is shaping the narrative and feeding us what it is he would like for us to see, right?
Mm.
It makes it very hard for us to understand what his strategy, his intentions, his motivations are. I do reach back to my understanding of North Korea, of him, from having seen him from the time he emerged, my understanding from so many conversations with North Koreans to try to understand where it is they're headed. Yeah, I think it's very hard for us to get a good read on him. And I think part of the narrative that we're seeing is designed to make sure that he's trying to give himself quite a bit of leverage, right, with each of these relationships with the country in the region. And so that's why I say it's always important to remember that even though is expanding on this relationship with Russia, that he's renounced reunification with South Korea,
Right.
that he's rebuffing overtures from President Trump, when it comes down to it, he actually needs all of these partners. And so that's one of the things that we should remember is the larger picture, the longer term goal for Kim Jong Un, for KJU, as we're going to call him. So absolutely, it's very hard to get a good read. That's why we need to triangulate information from so many different sources, rely on people like Joel who have had those years and decades of experience with these negotiations. Every time we have a new administration or a new group of people, our weakness in the United States is that we're cowboys. We think we can do it better than anyone else. Well, guess what? The same North Koreans, and Joel knows this, the same North Koreans who've been doing this for 30 years are still calling the shots in Pyongyang today.
Yeah.
They have the benefit of that history and that experience. We need to be doing the same.
Joel, over to you. If governing is about choosing, which I think it is, even in a democracy or an authoritarian or a dynasty, what are Kim's priorities as you see them? What are the must-haves as opposed to the it would be nice to haves?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I think I have a different view from Jean. I think the North Korea of today is very different from the North Korea of 2019, which was essentially almost the last year of 30 years of engaging the United States.
Mm.
And, this goes to the point I was trying to make earlier about pragmatism and problem solving. I think the North Koreans are pretty much geopoliticians. They are looking at how the world is evolving, how the international power politics are evolving, and that's governing the decisions they make about policy. And it was always struck me as funny that every time North Koreans went to New York City, they would meet with Henry Kissinger. I mean, a guy who actually considered using nuclear weapons against them when he was President Nixon's national security advisor. But they met with him because he was the grand master of geopolitics. And so when I say it's very different today than it was in 2019, it's very clear that North Korea has become a member of this alliance. That may be a slight exaggeration with Russia and China. And so what does Kim want today is very different from what he wanted in 2019. I think Kim is looking for ways to diminish US influence in the region. And that in turn has implications for whatever Washington's policies are. And I think that's one of the dangers here, that we don't realize that the Kim of today is different from the Kim of the past.
Yeah. But beyond regime dynastic survival, we're going to get to this in a minute, the issue of succession and who else in North Korea matters other than the Korean Workers' Party and Kim. Beyond survival, I mean, identify for me, each of you, Kim's aspirations, obviously to pass on. He's only 41. We'll get to this in a minute. What does he want? Joel, you want to take the first crack at this?
Yeah. So I think Kim is no longer interested in the kind of engagement he was interested in with the United States in 2019. I think Kim was very serious back then about engagement and improving relations with the United States. Today, I think Kim is interested in what Russia and China are interested in. And I think what he's interested in is lessening the US presence in Northeast Asia. He's interested in showing he's a global player. And you could see that whenever when he appeared in Beijing beside Putin and Xi. And there are other things he's interested in too, including, as some experts believe, preparing for what he may inevitably see as a second Korean War.
As a second what? I missed that.
I'm sorry, a second Korean War
on the peninsula. So you think that the big change is that Kim has decided that the channels to the U.S. are more constraints and more liabilities than assets. He may have tossed his lot with the Russians and the Chinese. So he's framing his priorities negatively, essentially. There was a Jung H. Pak from Brookings said that Kim's main goal was to be seen as a, quote, modern leader of a modern North Korea. Gene, to you, what about economics and the whole question of North Korea as is there any transformation possible? Does he seek it to get North Korea out of the economic straits that it's in? And if so, how does that happen?
So yes, I would say that I agree that right now Kim Jong Un's strategy is to align with Russia and China. These are transactional, at least with Russia, it's a transactional relationship that has been very beneficial, very strategic for him to, when he has something to offer, which is soldiers, to offer that to Putin in exchange for whatever he's getting that he needs at this time of isolation. But I wouldn't say that that's a final decision on his part. I do think that he is trying to skillfully play all these neighbors off one another, and that he will want to use President Trump's second term, this time in office, as an opportunity at some point. I don't know if it's going to be next week or if it's going to be in a year or two, but I do believe that he is going to try to find a way to pivot back and take advantage of the relationship that they built. Now, what I will say is when you're on the ground in North Korea, it is very clear that the North Korean people, and I would say the elites and even the military, and the leadership at all levels, and I've met the leadership at just about every level, they're tired of this Korean War narrative. They're never going to tell you that outwardly, but on the ground, they will tell you that they want to move past this, that they want to be a part of the world, that they want to have a better economic future. We cannot see it outwardly, but you feel it on the ground. And now what I will say, and I am sometimes criticized for saying things that may seem like a bit of a dream, but I do always say is, when can Kim Jong Un make the decisions that he needs to make in order for his country to thrive economically. Now, what I will say is that what I've been watching, and this goes to your question of who's important in North Korea, I would say that what I've been watching for the past 5 years is the rise of his reliance on North Korean hackers. I call them his cyber warriors. This is what I investigate in my podcast, The Lazarus Heist, because they are the ones who are helping him raise the money that he needs to withstand the isolation, the sanctions, and to fund the program to get what he needs.
Yeah. So let's turn for a brief discussion of succession. So you have dynastic rule, right? You have three Kims, is that right? Since 1948. As you see it, well, I'll quote South Korean intelligence, who basically says that you got a guy who's 41, preparing for his successor. He's got a history of heart trouble. They claim, again, based on this report, he's about 5'7", weighs over 300 pounds. Unhealthy habits, including chain smoking, heavy whining, and dining. Who has he chosen? Is it clear? Joel, do you?
I think I have a friend who says that we won't know until 15 years from now.
Yeah.
And I think that's the case. I mean, we've been through this before. It used to be that everyone expected Kim Jong Il's oldest son to succeed him. And then when the guy was caught trying to go to Disney World, everyone said, oh, I guess that's not going to be the case. And that was a reflection of the fact that he hadn't been chosen. And, when Kim Jong Un started to emerge, South Korean intelligence, they didn't even know his first name. So, there's a lot of uncertainty here. Kim also has at least one son, maybe two. And, no one really knows for sure. If he died tomorrow, of course, I think his sister would step into some role. But beyond that, we can't be sure about any of this.
There's a lot of talk lately on, largely because people observe Kim and his party at various events, a lot of focus on what appears to be his 12-year-old daughter. The only child who has ever appeared in North Korean state media. He refers to her as his, quote, dear daughter. Since late 2022, I think she's accompanied Kim to military parades, weapon tests, and she shows up in September at this very important meeting in Beijing. I mean, she's 12 years old, though, right? I mean, any sense? I realize it's, not even the famed oracle at Delphi, Pythia, reading the best of Godin trails could probably answer this question. But any sense? Fascinating, though. Any sense, Jean?
Yeah, I tend to look back at history. I have a collection of history books that I brought back with me from North Korea illegally through South Korea. Don't tell the South Koreans. And I go back to Kim Il-sung, the first leader, rather than Kim Jong-il, because I do believe that Kim Jong-un is trying to replicate many of the things that his beloved grandfather did. His father had a more complicated relationship among the people. That was very clear. And one of the things I noticed one of the things I went back to look for was, when did Kim Jong-il, the second, number two, when did he appear to the North Korean public? And interestingly enough, it was in a very similar context as the daughter, Jue, of Kim Jong-un. So around the same age and at almost the very same type of event. So it's very interesting. I always tend to look back at that earlier era. Now, what I will say is, there's always been some debate. Well, would they have a woman take over? Well, I always say being a Kim trumps being a woman. It's more important, right? What we call the Baekdu lineage. And so we can't rule it out. And so I don't think it's something that we can say with any certainty. I do look at past patterns to see how it's been done with the first leader of North Korea. So far, they are following precedent and history from that era. And so we can't rule it out. I do think that Kim Jong-un is doing things very differently than his father, but very similarly to his grandfather. I will say that I haven't seen any sign myself of older children. I know South Korean intelligence has put that report out to their lawmakers, but I myself have not seen that. It was very clear when the daughter was born. I mean, I knew she was pregnant, the mother was pregnant. We were all in Pyongyang anticipating the birth of a child. It was a 50-50. Well, I don't know what the odds are. We didn't know if it was going to be a girl or a boy. I'm sure he would have preferred a boy, but it happened to be a girl. So let's see.
So to you, Joel, who else matters in North Korea? There are wealthy families, the elites. Help me with the pronunciation here. The so-called money masters, the dongju. Who matters?
Aaron, I got to admit, I bet Eugene knows a lot more about this than I do. But, my perspective is, and it's a very superficial perspective, is that, there are people in the elite who matter, and they can express their opinions up until a certain point. But then, Kim Jong Un's view wins out. Beyond that, I think trying to figure out who matters in North Korea, at least to me, seemed like a big guessing game for 30 years.
Gene, over to you. Any thoughts? There was some talk about the rebalancing of the military, which I guess KJU either fired or eliminated a number of senior military officers, and in some sense that was designed to show the dominance of the party, Korean Workers' Party.
Yes. So early in his tenure in power, we saw him trying to consolidate power with a purge of the military. And again, a reemphasis on the party, which is similar to his grandfather. And I would say that if you're the leader of a totalitarian dictatorship, you are constantly trying to make sure that you are maintaining control. How you keep people in line through either repressive measures or through perks, right, is going to be very important. So for him, making sure that there isn't some sort of uprising, he's got to rely on either very heavy-handed tactics and or making sure that he's got the perks that he can offer them in a country that is very poor. So I tend to look at who is helping him bring in that money. That's why I look at the hackers. So, years ago, I wrote for the New York Times that it was the nuclear scientists who were the rock stars of North Korea. But right now, I would say that those cyber hackers are extremely important. They are not the ones who are calling the shots or have any say, like Joel's saying, they're not the ones who have any say, but they are the ones who are facilitating and giving the leader what he needs to maintain control and keep the elites happy. Because of course, it's the elites. If they were to rise up, and we saw some of that, of course. The uncle who was executed was part of a potential opposition or dissent, right? The uncle who was executed in 2013. And so I focus on who it is who's providing him with the resources that he needs. It used to be a network of business people, but now that network has been somewhat dismantled. And so they are relying quite a bit on illicit financing through cyber attacks.
Yeah, I want to spend the bulk of our session on U.S. policy, but I want to go through a sort of lightning round on these relationships. Let's start with North Korea. Someone said to me that perhaps the most significant event to watch in the region was Kim's decision to end his country's long-standing stated goal of reunification with South Korea. He gave a speech, I guess, Gene and Joel, in January of 2024 at the People's Assembly, basically calling for constitutional, I think, revisions to refer to South Korea as the principal enemy and to essentially abandon the notion that it was any sort of partner of reconciliation and or reunification. Is that a tactic or is that real? And it gets to Joel's point about the prospects of a conventional, Joel, conflict, a second Korean War. But Joel, to you first on South Korea. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think that's a tactic. I think it's real. I think, what happened with the engagement policy that ended in 2020. Kim was relying on President Moon for counsel about how to deal with Donald Trump. And so when the Hanoi summit failed,
Yeah.
he was really angry at President Moon. And I think he realized that South Korea essentially was powerless. And so I think all of this is reflecting that. And it's also reflecting this new emphasis on building up his military capabilities and on, reunification, but maybe not peaceful reunification. So the relationship, as far as I can see, is the worst it's been in 30 years.
Right. Gene, do you on this? It's a keeper rather than a temporary bend in the road?
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective from Joel, and very insightful. I do think, I do think Kim Jong Un I agree, he felt very burned by what he may have felt were mischaracterizations or overpromises on the part of the South Koreans, if I'm reading between the lines of what you're saying. I agree with that. However, I do think that the North Koreans understand deep down that there's no other country that has the kind of connection to them as South Korea, no other people who have the same kind of connection. So it's hard for me to imagine them forever renouncing a relationship. So I hate to make absolutes when it comes to North Korea, because I think it's so complicated and things can shift very quickly. And I do think that Kim Jong Un is very transactional and very opportunistic. So I do think that we have to take it very, very seriously, though, because it does change many, many factors, both in terms of North Korean policy and South Korean policy. So, I do think that the North Koreans understand that the only country that is really going to come to their aid in a certain intrinsic way is South Korea. So it's hard for me to see them completely renounce South Korea.
Yeah.
But I think they're trying to change the terms.
Yeah. China. Clearly, the Chinese are looking for stability on the peninsula. They are worried about migrant flows. And the nuke piece of it appeared to be a concern of theirs, although I think, if I'm not mistaken, that it was the first time during Kim's visit to Beijing that the Chinese there was no reference to denuclearization in any of the communiques. And I wonder if that shows, Joel, any diminished sort of leverage on the part of the Chinese. What is the nature of that relationship? And we're going to segue now. The U.S. has always looked at China as some sort of lever to be pulled in a positive direction to constrain or contain North Korea. Is that a safe bet still, Joel?
Well, look, there's just been a geopolitical shift here. I keep repeating this. And, China is still somewhat important, but Russia is the main player here now. It's the Russian-North Korean relationship that is central to whatever is going to happen in the future. The Chinese are trying to repair what's been a very bad relationship. But, how much progress they make, who knows? Because the Russians are willing to provide the North Koreans with a lot more assistance than the Chinese are, and a lot more support for them. So that's the key to any future, is the Russian-North Korean relationship. And here, I just got to disagree with Gene. I don't think I think that relationship is pretty solid at this point. It's not transactional. And that doesn't mean it's going to continue forever. I mean, nothing continues forever. But it's pretty solid. And, one day Kim Jong Un is not going to wake up and say, gee, I should shift back to the United States. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, I guess the key variable here would be Ukraine, right?
A lot of people argue that if the Ukraine war ends, and Russia isn't going to need North Korea anymore.
Right.
But I think the relationship has gone much further than that. It's very broad and it's very solid. And in the recent parade in Pyongyang, North Korean troops who fought in Ukraine marched with the Russian flag and the North Korean flag. And to many observers, that was an incredible sign of the solidity of the relationship.
Yeah. In the 10 minutes that remains, let's talk about the U.S. and North Korea. Joel, let me ask you, if you were to identify, you were at this for quite a while. What are the don'ts now, Joel, with respect to U.S. policy toward North Korea? What are the key do not do's before we get to rethinking? What shouldn't this administration do with respect to North Korea?
Well, for a long time, I've supported engagement with North Korea, and I still support it to some degree. But my concern is that, the administration and President Trump, are going to go ahead like this is 2019 and assume that if Kim agrees to a summit, they're just going to sort of pick up where we left off. And that's not the case, not even close to the case, to the point where I've often thought maybe we shouldn't have a summit, because I think Kim Jong Un is going to try to take advantage of President Trump. So, for example, if there's a summit and Kim Jong Un, who knows President Trump very well, says, well, why don't you withdraw troops from South Korea? There's a chance President Trump would say yes. And Kim's reasoning for doing that is he wants to get the United States out of the region. So we need to be very careful here about how we approach any engagement. And I'm not entirely convinced that the Trump administration can do that.
Yeah, if the two of you are right, that the Hermit Kingdom notwithstanding, that KJU is more astute in terms of reading regional international trends, the notion he's already identified, I'm sure. I mean, I've identified it. And I live in Chevy Chase, Maryland. He's sitting in a conflict area and he understands the America First piece of this. He watches Ukraine and he wonders whether or not he can't figure out a way to get Trump to limit exercises with the North Koreans, diminish the U.S. military presence with South Korea, weaken the alliance, in essence. What Trump would ask for in return is unclear. Gene, what do you think about let's go right to the issue, because I think love letters to Donald Trump and KJU to Trump notwithstanding, I think there probably will be at some point talk another summit, or maybe a fourth summit. What are the don'ts as far as you're concerned, Gene, with respect to how this administration should look at North Korea now?
Yeah, and I will say that I'm just going back to 2019 when we had a tweet, back when we called it Twitter. President Trump was heading to the region, sent a tweet, and I think it was very quickly, probably within 48 hours, there was a handshake at the DMZ, right, between President Trump and Kim Jong Un. So we are watching that space because we have, the reason why this talk is so timely is because we have President Trump heading to Asia. All of our attention has been on the Middle East to a certain, rightly so, but he will be turning his attention to diplomacy in Asia at the end of this week. And one thing I noticed in South Korean media was that tours to Panmunjom inside the DMZ have been suspended for next week. So, you just think, okay, is there a possibility? Now, I do think the concern that we had even in 2018 and 2019, many of us, was, does the president of the United States understand how complicated and what the consequences are for this type of engagement? Even this type of leader-to-leader summit gives Kim Jong Un so much legitimacy. Well, we're well beyond that now, because so many of the leaders have now given him that kind of legitimacy. The consequence of that, of course, is that it emboldens him, gives him the legitimacy at home to carry out what are arguably the world's repressive policies, and to devote so many resources that they don't have to nuclear weapons. The concern, of course, is what kind of a deal will President Trump make with Kim Jong Un that could for the South Koreans, put South Korea at risk. And I would say beyond that, put the region and the United States at risk. So I would say that question, which made it so hard to find a resolution in 2019, has only gotten exponentially more difficult.
Right. And I would guess, Joel, that part of the reason is that denuclearization is now completely and utterly off the table. I noticed that the new president of South Korea basically talked, I think, a week or so about a freeze in North Korea's nuclear weapons, as long as denuclearization was still there as an ultimate objective. But is there a quid pro quo here, Joel? That's number one. And number two, who is advising? And based on my own personal experience, I don't want to put too much stock in how advisors do or don't affect U.S. secretaries of state and presidents when they've made up their minds. But number one, what is the quid pro quo for a possible deal with North Korea? And number two, you follow the tea leaves on this one. Who is advising the president who knows North Korea?
The second question you're asking is extremely important, because in 2019, there were capable advisors. And in fact, no one, it's not well known, but they had negotiated a long summit declaration for Hanoi that was never issued. Today, there aren't any advisors. And moreover, President Trump has said this: who knows North Korea better than I do? Back then, he didn't think that. So right away, to me, that's a real warning sign. Secondly, what's the quid pro quo here? I think the most we can hope for are some sort of confidence building measures, but it's not going to happen overnight. So, an initial encounter, you may see a summit declaration that says, oh, we're going to keep talking, and we support lessening tensions in the region. But beyond that, I wouldn't expect much.
Right. And on the issue of, if someone asked you, both of you, in our final minutes, why should we care about North Korea, assuming Catherine Bigelow's movie would provide a partial explanation, is North Korea the dog that never bites or barks? What is the margin, the room for a serious negotiation and agreements with North Korea? And why should we care? Joel, you referred to a second Korean War. What did you mean by that?
Well, look, there are a lot of reasons why we should care. The fact that there hasn't been a second Korean War shouldn't mean we shouldn't care. So, there's a U.S. national interest in regional stability. There are the economic interests, represented by South Korea and Japan. There's the danger that we're in now of an escalating arms race in the region that could result in other countries acquiring nuclear weapons, especially South
Yeah.
Korea. There's all of the above. And if you throw on top of that, what many experts feel is North Korea's escalating modernization of its conventional forces. And, Kim thinking about, well, gee, maybe under the right circumstances, another war might be in his interests.
Right.
I mean, to me, all of this means we should care.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. Gene, I'll leave you with the last word on this.
Yeah, I would say it comes back to, I would agree that it comes back to down to proliferation, and it comes down to the people, not only the people of North Korea. We have a vibrant country, South Korea, intrinsically linked in so many ways with ours. And I would say that this is a threat that goes well beyond the Korean Peninsula when we're talking about a country that is already selling its technology to other rogue nations. So this is precisely why North Korea is taking this route. They want us to pay attention. And actually, we had ballistic missile launches today. I see those as a kind of way for to remind us that they're still there and they're still testing, they're still building. This is precisely why they like to be the bad boy of the region, to get us to pay attention.
Well, we'll see, won't we? October 28th, which I think is the same day that Joel's book is published. I think the president is due to go to ASEAN. We'll see if there are any surprises. And again, Gene, let me thank you. And Joel, your authority and experience on this is great. We got through a lot. Not as deeply as I would have hoped, but that's not your problem. It's a function of time. Again, the book is Fallout, the inside story of America's failure to disarm North Korea. It really is really well written, and it does read like a spy novel. For those followers of Carnegie Connects, stay tuned. November 3rd, I'll be sitting down with New York Times Nick Kristof to talk about the state and fate of the American Republic and its role in the world. Gene Lee, thanks again. Joel Eswit, thanks again. And thank everyone else for listening and watching. Take good care.